Start again. Apologies, technical difficulties. Yeah, thank you all for joining and good morning. Today we're going to be talking about carbon and climate change, everything to do with it and the specifics of it. And hopefully at the end of today, you'll have really good insight on what to do and how to tackle it. So we're going to work through the what, the where, the who's, and how to do it. And we're also going to get into some really good specific examples from a long-standing good client of ours, Storm Geomatics. So just before we get into it, it'd be good to do some introductions. So my name's Will, I'm the Carbon Manager Interface. I've been here for about 3 or 4 years, and I, along myself as well as the previous director, Gavin, we co-created and developed our accreditation approach. So over the time we've worked and managed this, we've really consolidated our approach, and through that I've learned a lot of experience and knowledge, and it'd be great if I could pass this on to you and hopefully help you make a more informed decision. So no pressure. And then, so we've got Mike next to us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Will. Yeah, I'm Mike Hopkins, and I'm a good client by all accounts. My role is Managing Director of Storm Geomatics, which is the only UK geospatial company that specialises in rivers. Lots of other geospatial companies survey lots of different things, but 95% of our work is to do with rivers. So when you go on the Environment Agency website and type your postcode in to see what your flood risk is, you'll see a map, and the data that we provide, there's a good chance that our data is behind that somewhere. We also do river condition assessments, so we look at improving river habitats, improving the natural function of a river. So we're qualified to score a river and then be able to advise on interventions to improve the condition of that river. And I'm here today because I really want to let people know about carbon reporting, because it's something that's really helping our business at the moment in lots of different ways.
Thank you for that. And as you probably guessed, we've chose the right person for this. Definitely got the pulse on the planet, and they definitely know what's going on. So it's really good to get some really good on the ground insight into their journey with this. So before we get into the specifics of Storm and their experience, it's really good to paint a picture of the whys and the whats and the standards in general. So we'll start with the why. So before we get into the standards and the verifications, let's step back and look at why all of a sudden so many organizations are being asked about carbon, their carbon data, their reduction, their targets, their plans. So carbon accounting itself isn't new. It's been around for quite a long time, but what's changed is who is asking and the frequency of that. The who can be anyone, public bodies, private bodies, organizations, NGOs, governments, and the frequency is often on an annual basis at this point or through tendering. So carbon data has moved from something that is being asked from the marketing department to produce some glossy graphs or glossy reports to go on their website, to being asked by the commercial team, lenders, insurers, mortgage brokers, or procurement team. The carbon data has shifted now into a business data set. So what I mean by a business data set is it's a data set that can be used to help make strategic decisions within your business. So we can contextualize it to interface if we've got a large fleet of vehicles as we're growing quite rapidly. And if our vehicles are approaching renewal, we could look at our carbon data set to make an informed decision about, well, this is a core area of our emissions. Let's start slowly pivoting and transition to electric cars. So for the first time, this data has got a lot of value, and it's becoming more, it's shifting from more of an abstract sustainability exercise to more of a business exercise. So organizations are now being asked more than ever to show their data, but not even just show their data, to paint a picture. What's in your footprint, what's not in your footprint, who's verified it. So I think before we get into the specifics of what a carbon footprint is, it's really good to paint the picture of climate change, the context of it. So as you're all aware, it's hard to navigate the topic of climate change and navigate the very difficult and convoluted political and policy landscape. So if we look at it from an environmental point of view, climate change is a multi-generational issue. And I don't mean to sound daunting or scary about that, but that is the reality of it. The impacts of climate change will be felt by myself and Mike, but also my kids and grandchildren. It's something that is a huge issue that can't be emphasized enough. And we can really contextualize this to where we are at the moment. So we are, to give it away, we're in Telford, and we are in Shropshire, which is our county. Shropshire is a very rural and beautiful county. We're in the heart of Shropshire, is somewhere called Ironbridge, which is the heart of the Industrial Revolution. So not to get too history nerd about it, but it's a really beautiful place, definitely worth going to it. The River Severn flows through it. So as Mike mentioned about flooding, it's a key part of what's emerging in this in the UK landscape, that flooding is having some real world impacts. So flooding is in the context of Shropshire. The River Severn's got a very large catchment area. So the more frequent heavy rainfall events, the more severe rainfall events means the catchment collects the water and it goes to the river. It's quite a basic way of explaining it. It's flooding so much more frequently, more than I remember in my childhood. And that means that the houses at the moment are uninsurable, which means they're unmortgageable, which means that those houses will just, unless someone wealthy comes along, will just go to wreck and ruin. And it's really sad. But we're not here to talk about Ironbridge, we're here to talk about businesses. So we contextualize it to a business. You would look at supply chains. So supply chains are so incredibly fragile. We are in a globalized world and a globalized economy. We ourselves are part of an international supply chain, as I imagine Mike would be with the equipment they buy. It is a globalized world, and they are more affected by climate change than ever. If there is heavy rainfall or flooding or typhoon that affects the transportation network, it could cause a delay in your goods being received and the execution of the job or the contract you're on. It is really hard to navigate this business landscape without looking at the risk climate change plays on your business. And it's definitely shifted from an abstract environmental concept that you would be asked to write an essay about in university to actually looking at it from a business continuity point of view and from a risk management point of view. So I don't mean to scare you with the insight of climate change, but we've got to be quite realistic with it. But there's loads of positive things going on the planet to move us towards a good position of reduction and making the planet better and healthier. So if we just bring this back to the landscape of the UK. So I mentioned about the political and government landscape. The only way to really sense where this is going is looking at what's happened now and what's happened in the last 12 to 18 months. It is very obvious, and some will get into the specifics of this, that public tenders, frameworks, agreements, even private tenders and supply chains are asking for carbon data. They're asking for what your carbon footprint is and what it is made up, and have you got a report, which we can get into shortly. But it's not even that. There's companies out there who have no legal, mandatory, or formal reporting requirements, but they're being asked by their supply chain. And because we live in a globalized world, in the UK, the EU is probably one of our largest trading partners. So any EU regulations that are issued, regardless of leaving the EU, we have to cooperate with their supply chain. So if they're being asked for it, it will trickle down and trickle up to the people who are within that network. And they're being asked for two things. What are your targets? Which is rarely coming up, but it's still a question. But more importantly, what data do you have and is it credible? And there's two key words there really, is data and credible. Anyone can knock up any data and present it for a tender in a bid to hopefully win it. The question is though, is that accurate? Is it transparent? And is it credible? And the whole point of this conversation we're having today is the end goal, if you complete the process and you sign up and you start and you get engaged, is you will have credible data. So there are generally sort of more frequency in these questions being asked, and there is definitely a reputational risk to this. If you knock up any old bit of data and it's not really supported and you've missed out large bits, it can cause reputational risk to your business. It is something that you don't really want to mess about with. And claims around being low carbon or lower emitting is questioned more than ever, especially as new directives have come out about green claims and things like that. So mentioned about sort of reputational risk. I think it's worth talking about the positives of this and not be too doom and gloom. There definitely is some positives. You can shift the risk to opportunity. And it sounds very cliche, but starting early and starting before your competitors gives you a clear commercial advantage, and it gives you a strong position. And Storm are definitely a testament to this, and we can get into it when we go through Storm. But the reality of it is that if you start earlier, it gives you more time to improve your methodologies and consolidate and get into a really strong position. And it also means that when you are actually calculating your footprint, you know your data. And when it comes to these tendering battles, requests, even emails and letters from people within your community, you can respond confidently with this information and portray that you are in a confident position. You have the data, you understand it, and you even know how to improve it. So if we look at it from a business benefit point of view, so calculating your emissions often highlights areas of high emission activities, obviously. So if we look at interfaces perspective, we travel all over the UK and even parts of the world. And we know from our data that we have a lot of business travel. So we would know that is an area to target to try to transition to low emission equivalent. So better hotels or better travel and things like that. And also for some businesses, and from my experience as the manager and one of our main verifiers, is that often the case when we work with clients, they are in real time finding out that some high emitting areas actually correspond with high cost areas they weren't aware of. So they can try to reduce that, and especially in the current economical climate, reducing areas of high spend and making it more efficient is definitely a business advantage. So early movers don't necessarily have perfect data, and that is the key bit for this. It's better to have imperfect data and start than have not started at all, basically. And over time, you will consolidate your approach. So I've painted a bit of a picture there, really what the space is, what's going on, what are the signals, and why we're doing it. The next thing to talk about is the standard, and this is hopefully, I won't bore you to death with it, but ISO 14064 is the main standard. This is what Mike is working towards. This is what we work towards. This is what we're accredited against, and something I read almost on a daily basis at this point. This standard is the backbone. It's guidance for quantifying your footprint, and it works towards net zero. And that's key because net zero aligns with a lot of government national targets. So the UK is the net zero 2050, which sounds a long way away, but it really isn't when you start looking at the numbers and how to reduce it. So let's peel it back even further and go, what is a carbon footprint? So we mentioned about carbon accounting. Carbon accounting simply is understanding your emissions from your business within a specific time period. So a lot of for companies, the same as Storm, is it's your financial year. So that is how many emissions or how many greenhouse gases have you emitted within your financial year. And this information is presented on something called a greenhouse gas statement, which is basically a glorified bank statement that shows your emissions throughout the year. And it's presented in categories. So these categories are part of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is an internationally recognized guidance document basically for calculating your footprint. And they're presented in Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. And each scope is broken down to sub-emission categories. So for interface, let's say we've got a fleet of maybe 10 to 20 cars. Emissions associated with those cars throughout the year would fall into company vehicles, which is the emission category name, in Scope 1. They are our direct emissions. We have direct control and we can directly reduce it as well. And then electricity is another good example of this. Throughout the year, you use and consume a lot of electricity. For us as a professional service, it's quite low, whereas manufacturers, this will be quite significant. Your electricity consumption is presented in purchase electricity, very sort of commonly named, very obviously is where it goes. In terms of how it's presented in a figure called tons of CO2e, which is the standard unit of measurements. At the bottom of the statement will tell you your total footprint, so let's say 200 tons, and that is what you communicate to stakeholders, that is what you are being asked for. So why do standards matter? And that's sort of a question that we do ask. And as a verification body, we have to always hedge and defend the corner of why standards matter. So without standards, everyone would quantify and calculate their footprint very differently. And it means it's very difficult to compare. So the main goal of our journey towards net zero is to gradually reduce your figure and get it as close to zero or to get to your residual emissions. It is clearly within the business's incentive to try to get that figure as low as possible. And without giving specific examples, there are cowboys out there who will try to get that figure as low as possible in whatever means they can. And that can mean missing out large portions of their footprint that they sort of believe are not relevant to the company. And you can Google this and you can find some really good examples of companies who are doing this. But what a standard does is it provides a framework, guidance, a rule book even of what should be counted for, how it should be explained, how it should be reported, and it paints a full picture. So it really makes you question your footprint, and you have to explain those categories you think are relevant, and then and provide justification for it. You can't just go, I think it's not relevant, it's quite big and I can't be bothered. It's not really an acceptable excuse, and it wouldn't really fly in any verification with anyone. But that's the reality of it. So why does it matter? To get down to specifics, it's consistency, transparency, and credibility. Credibility is key for this because that's where verification comes in, and you want credible green claims. You want credible carbon footprints. You want to be able to portray yourself to your stakeholders and tell them that you are a credible organization and business. And this, when it is a credible approach, it allows organizations to come in and actually verify this data. And this is a key word, verification. So verification is a new term that has emerged over the last sort of 24 months within the sort of the landscape of being a certificate body. So for Interface, we've been a certificate body for 10 years maybe, quite a long time, but we've only been a verification body officially for the past 12 to 18 months once we got the accreditation from UCAS. And what we mean is we're verifying claims made, past claims made by organisations on their footprint. And this is what the standard works towards. It's under 14064, we can verify your carbon footprint against the standards. So let's just go through it slowly. So you've calculated your footprint, you've got a statement. You worked towards and worked against 14064. What do you get at the end of it? You get a documented carbon footprint, you get a clear emission total, which can be shared to stakeholders, and you get a supporting report and an explanation. At that point, you go, great, I think I need to get someone to check this because I'm not too sure. I want a bit more confidence in it. I want some assurance. That's where we as Interface or other VBs, but obviously Interface is the preferred option, come into that, and we would then verify your carbon footprint. We provide assurance, which means that based on the information provided, we agree that there is no material misstatements, no significant errors within your footprint. At the end of that process, you get a statement which you can share to your stakeholders and things like that. So I'm aware that verification in 14064 is a new concept and process, so I can go through it at a high level so you have some familiarity before you hopefully engage with it. So for those ISO certificate holders out there, there's a stage 1 and stage 2. This is very similar to 14064. We have a pre-verification and a verification. Let's say you contact us, we get all the information, you get our quote, you're blown away by how amazingly affordable it is, and you're really keen to start. You start, and you presumably be in contact with me at that point, and we will have a pre-verification. This is where you present your footprint, and at a high level perspective, I identify any risks and anomalies that might stop you at this process, and we complete some risk assessments. And at the end of it, I go, yes, you're great to continue, or quite frankly, no, you're not in a position to continue. It's mostly people do continue. And then you have the verification, where at that point, I ask you 1,000,001 questions, and at the end of it, you'll either be amazed, pardon me, or really annoyed. But at the end of it, you'll have some confidence that your footprint is correct and accurate, and there will be some assurance against it, which means that you can now share it. And for bringing it back to tendering, for tendering, yes, having a footprint is one thing, but having it verified is another, and it often increases your score on that process. So we've gone through the process, and you hopefully have some familiarity and understanding about the verification process and what it contains and why we're doing it. Let's bring this home to a company now, and let's get into what Storm's doing, and what we're going to go through. So for those that have joined late, this is Mike. He's the owner and founder of Storm. And might be able to sort of give a bit of context to the company for those who joined late before we get into the questions.
Yeah, Storm Geomatics is a geospatial surveying company that specialise in the river corridor. So all our projects are related to flood risk mapping and modelling, flood risk assessments, or habitat surveys to enhance river habitats.
That's great. So we've obviously chosen a great company to do this with because they're really in tune with what's going on. So you've been doing this for about 4 years. So 4 years ago, what was the landscape like for tendering? What was your drivers for this really? Why did you start it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back a long way, really, a lot further than 4 or 5 years in what we've seen happening in our rivers. Actually, the increased intensity of rainfall, which creates more regular flood events. We're even having to create survey calendars for our clients now to say, please give us this work here and this work here and this work here, because some rivers you just can't get in the winter. So these things, this noticeable climate change thing, and the word climate change has been around since the 80s, but let's face it, when it first came out, everyone said it's some sort of theory that we could discount, and the man in the pub says it's a load of rubbish and all that sort of thing. But actually, it's when you start to feel it yourself as a person, you begin to look into it, and looking into it and looking into the science of it. Let's face it, geospatial surveyors are scientists. We understand science and we get that and we follow it. And when you think, actually, this is a real thing, this greenhouse gas stuff is going up there, and it's causing the planet to warm, and it's causing more intense rain, blah blah blah. So you get that, but then at the same time, you're in an environmental sort of market. Okay, so people that are trying to stop flooding have realised that we've got to stop these greenhouse gases. So they come to us and say, right, we've all got to, the whole supply chain's got to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So you start looking into it, and that's where you think, right, I need to be on this, because if I'm not on this, I'm probably not going to be part of their team to solve these problems in the future. And that's really where it started in its intensity.
I think that's really interesting, because what you touched on there is two things: is supply chain interest and pressure, but also a company ethos, really, that it aligns with their ethos. And what we do see when we engage with these clients who start this process is it's twofold. They've got some clients or big projects where it's needed, but also for some clients, it just aligns with their ethos and they want to create a greener future. So, which is obviously really nice and really well intended. So over the last sort of year to sort of 2 years, have you noticed an increase in tenders where you are being asked for this data more? Is it getting more frequent?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's more data driven than ever. I mean, sort of 10 years ago, we all had an environmental statement on an A4 piece of paper, and that used to just be part of your war chest of, your tender submission. And no one ever checks that you're doing anything. And it's really basically, I think, a waste of time. It's greenwashing, So for me to have something which we can actually be verified against, gives us the credibility and the confidence to go back to our clients and say, this is what we're doing for you now. But in terms of the tenders, they are becoming more detailed. It's not just a tick box exercise anymore. Are you on the road to this? Are you doing something? Yes or no? It's more a case of, what are you doing? Let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. And that's where I think this verification process is helping us.
Yeah, I think that's really good insight there from someone who's got sort of boots on the ground and experience in this, and I think it's true across a lot of sectors where people are getting asked this more frequently. So if we just paint a picture, so let's say a lot of the people here are new and haven't done it before. You've had the experience of being able to consolidate over time, but if we just go back to day one when you first started it, how did you find it? What was it like collecting your data? What systems do you use? Like, how did you What's your experience of it?
Yeah, I mean, when you first look at what you've got to do, I think it's like, oh my goodness, this looks like a tricky thing to achieve. But actually, when you start looking at it, so your scopes 1 and 2, which is the things under your control, things like mileage on your cars. Normally, everybody's got a mileage sort of spreadsheet somewhere of all the different cars. So that was quite easy to get, and things like overnight stays. We know how many overnight stays we have per month, per week, per year.
That's really good.
But the big thing is your accounting system, because most of carbon emissions is calculated on an emission factor per pound of spend. So and these emission factors vary across the different types of goods you're buying or capital purchases. So to have a good accounting system is good, because you can create reports from that, and to have all those other things which most companies have got, let's face it, you've just got to pile them all in, consolidate them all into one sort of spreadsheet. We use something called Nero. So Nero is a spreadsheet where you put all this data in, and it works out all your emissions by putting the correct emission factors in, etc.
I think that you touched on a really good sort of key bits there. It's probably worth breaking down. So you mentioned about spend data and mileage data. So for some companies we work with, spend data is all they have. So that is where, generally speaking, it's pulled from a P&L, which is profit and loss from your accounting system, or whatever it may be, your capital expenditure or capital asset list. What that is using spend, and that is totally acceptable. And then for some companies who we work with, they have activity data, which is consumption. So what I mean by that is when Mike referenced about mileage, for example, he's in an unfortunate position where he actually collects this data already, where some companies haven't got a clue how many miles are being traveled in their vehicles, or where they're going, or how many nights hotels they've stayed. And this is the thing with the standard and this approach. It's continual improvement. You start at a point of imperfect data, and you work towards a long-term goal of consolidation and reduction. You mentioned about Nero as well. So there are a lot of consultants out there. So my sort of advice to the audience is, if you are looking for a consultant, just approach us and we'll be able to help, and I'll be able to sort of provide a list of trusted consultants with that. Well, let's go down to the benefits of a consultant, really. So how could you have done it by yourself? Do you think the Nero or a consultant in general was needed?
I mean, I really don't think we would have made a very good job of it ourselves in year one. I think you do need some guidance in year one. I think as the years have gone on, we've understood the system better, and we've actually improved our reporting because we understand it more. At the end of the day, it's a spreadsheet, and as long as everything's in the right place, then I think you could probably do it on your own later on. But that's the whole point. The first year, I do think you probably need a bit of help.
Yeah, I do agree. I think from my experience, we see two different approaches, basically. You either approach us with a consultant, you approach us with the intent of not using a consultant. At the end of the day, they both achieve the same intended result. The latter option without a consultant, generally speaking, at the pre-verification stage, there's a lot more gaps identified, and there is a potential that you might need to go back and fix those before proceeding. But they're both equally as successful. So you've gone through this approach now, and you've said you've you've used a consultant and you've made improvements over time. What do you do? So you've got your footprint now, you've calculated it. Who do you share it with, and how does this feed into your reduction in sort of the direction of your business? How does that work?
Well, it's a great day when you get your results, because it obviously changes every year, and you're hoping you've reduced it and by what you've done. And we publicly display this report on our website. And last year our carbon footprint was 202 tons, and which was disappointing, because it's actually more than the previous year. And then you think to yourself, well, it's supposed to be reducing, but actually the business has grown 25%. So it's very difficult to reduce your carbon footprint and grow your business. So there are metrics on the website which show you, carbon emissions per £1,000,000, for instance, or carbon emissions per employee, and that is falling. So we are going in the right direction in that sense. And you know, I had a couple of letters before Christmas to the business asking about what our carbon footprint was, you know, by one of our biggest clients, you know, and how are we reducing this. And it's very nice to be able to go back to them and say, well, I know exactly what our carbon footprint is. And actually, on your carbon reporting sheet, you can use our emission factor, which is 0.1135, right, against what you're probably using now as the standard for professional services of 0.191. And that, with the amount of money you spend with us, is probably going to save you about 60 tonne of carbon. So not only are they getting a great service from us in terms of survey, they're also getting the side benefit of being able to reduce their own carbon emissions for their company.
That's really good. And I think Mike explained some really good, important things there. So what he's basically communicated there is that he presents both his total footprint, which in technical terms is called absolute emissions. That is your total footprint from your company. And he also says something that we sort of technical experts call intensity ratios. So that is your emissions per item. So for interface, it could be emissions per audit, or for Storm, it could be per pound or per survey. And what that means is that it works with growth. So obviously, as well as Storm's interface, business growth is really important. And then one of the biggest myths of this is that it's anti-growth, because you've got to work towards reducing it, whereas growth would increase it. And that they can't be furthest away from the truth, because these intensity ratios are designed so that when you are experiencing growth, that you do experience growth and you take it on. Growth is great, but you also reduce in key areas. So for us, it could be transportation, same for Mike and Storm. And that means that the emissions per audit or per survey or per pound spent do drop. So that is a really good sort of myth that was sort of busted there. But yeah, I think that's really good insight, because you're both sharing two things really. You're benefiting your client and you're able to basically respond confidently, which is really good. So obviously, and this is going to be a very biased conversation now, because I've been verifying you for about 4 years now, but how have you found the verification process? Has it been as straightforward as you had anticipated, or has it been challenging? Sort of give us an honest insight.
I think it's been very challenging, Will, having you sat on the other side of the desk, and we've definitely had our ups and downs and our own arguments in there, but you're always right. And you know, I think that's what it's all about. That's what an audit's all about. A verification process is all about. It's about trying to improve your reporting in this case, and finding the holes and the gaps and the faults, and improving it all the time. And actually, I look forward to that, because I do, as a surveyor, you know, we're very sort of, you know, intent on being accurate. And when it comes to reporting our greenhouse gases, we're kind of the same way. You know, I want to get it absolutely bang on. It's never going to be. And you know, the other thing is, you know, no one's whiter than white on this subject. You know, we all, you know, go down the pub on a Friday and drink beer and do extravagant things. But, you know, there are certain things that you can do, I think, that are really easy to do. And, you know, when you talked a bit earlier about what we use the report for, well, we use it to find out where our biggest emissions are and how we can reduce them. And, you know, we've changed electricity provider from E.ON to Opus, and that immediately gave us a 75% reduction in our scope 2s, because Opus were 90% renewables, but actually they've just been taken over now, I think. So that changes things, but you've got to keep your eye on these things. We put solar panels on the roof. You know, I could get 120 miles in my car if I sat at my desk on my electric car.
Yeah, it's really good.
We're changing our fleet as well. So these things take a long time as well, because not all your vehicles, you can't just ship them all out and bring in all your electrics, for instance.
Yeah, it's a gradual process.
It's a gradual process.
Absolutely.
And, you know, not all electric cars were going to be any good for towing our boats and things like this. So, but now we're finding cars with longer range. We're able to hitch the boat up and off we go. Electric outboards, you know, things like this. So what you can't measure, you can't manage, and any surveyors out there will know that. And this is exactly the same thing. We're measuring our carbon and getting it verified so that we can manage it better. We can see where the easy wins are.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and I think hopefully from this conversation, everyone's got more of a sense of the process and more confidence with it. Because Mike's obviously worked with us for quite a while now, and yes, the process at time can result in debates on what is right and wrong, and especially when two companies operate with such integrity. But if the verifier has been trained, hopefully if we've done my job right, they are trained correctly, that they can actually act with integrity and make informed decisions. And at the end of the day, what we're working towards is a statement to be accurate and credible. That is what the end goal is, and we don't want to deviate from that, make compromises where it sort of reduces the credibility and integrity of it. So I think we are sort of running out of time slowly. We could talk for another 2 hours, I think, going through stuff. But I think this has been a really good insight for everyone. And if you are thinking about engaging with it, there are quite a few sort of calls to action we can make here. So any questions that anyone's dropped through, our team is going to go through.
Before you do that, can I just do a little plug?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you want to know what the carbon footprint is of anything, this is a great book to start with. I think you can get it on Amazon. I'm not sure, but this gives you an insight into carbon footprint of just about everything. And now this one, I really got to get this out here. There was a game made from this book called the Banana Game, and it gives you little flashcards like this, and you have to decide what's got the biggest carbon footprint. And I have to say, water was a shocker, right? Because who buys bottled water in plastic every day? Not a good idea, because you can have 1,000 pints of tap water to 1 bottle of plastic water. 1,000 pints of tap water. So get yourself a water bottle, you know, and fill it up from the tap. Don't go buying plastic water every day, every time you go to the shops, get your lunch, because it actually even tells you what the emissions are for each item. So we're going to move on to questions, I think.
Yeah, I think that before we move on, obviously, plenty of time, we can carry on. But that's a really good example of ethical purchasing and ethical procurement, whether it's from a business point of view, choosing better providers, but also from a personal point of view, so choosing better quality clothes or better products, and buying a reusable plastic water bottle is something that's been drilled into us, but that's a clear example of why you need to do it. So we're going to go to Q&A in a minute, but before we do, just a couple of points to action, really. So following this, if you have any inquiries or any interest, please contact us. We'll reach out after this. Also follow us on LinkedIn, and myself as well. Follow me on LinkedIn. We can communicate through there. Same with Mike and Storm. Please follow them and keep up to date. And if you have any questions or insight, please ask either of us. We do have some questions that have come through, and hopefully I'll do my best to answer them without being too consultancy. So one of the questions is, with so many platforms and providers, what makes interface different? It's a very good question. Obviously, my natural response is because I work here, but I think if we get down to like the specifics of it, I think we're different because if we start with platforms and providers, so there are many platforms which you can calculate your carbon footprint on. That is very much a Wild West world at the moment. What we would recommend doing is going towards a platform that is A, 14064 verified against, but also somewhere that has some background in sustainable reporting would be preferable. The best thing to do is contact us. We have unfortunately worked with clients who have worked with providers that at the end can't deliver the results they need. So definitely go down a route of trusted providers and platforms. And what makes interface different is a very hard thing to sum up in 2 minutes or 30 seconds, but we are an employee-owned CB, which is basically one of one. We operate at such a high level of integrity and credibility that it really makes a difference in this process, because what you do want is you want someone who is supportive in this process and fair and makes reasoned decisions, but also someone that does unfortunately have to hold you to account in this process, and at the end of it you should have the results you want. And don't just take my word for it. We've got Trustpilot, which is our main metric for this. Please have a read and look into it, and that should hopefully answer your question with that. How do you calculate your environmental product declaration? That is a very interesting and very technical question. So environmental product declaration, or otherwise known by its acronym, is EPD. So that is basically the emissions associated per product. So like, what's the emissions of this mouse? And it's good for knowing exactly how many products you brought and how many emissions correspond with that. In terms of calculating it, that is a very difficult thing. So we're talking about organizational level here, which is the often starting block for this. Companies calculate their organizational footprint, they get that verified and then consolidate it for maybe a year or two, and then they work on to product declarations. Most platforms focus on organizations. Some platforms are dual providing, so they can work on products, but products is very different. So it takes into a lot of consideration. So consumables, so like if you're making a bench, how many blades would you use? What's the energy that's used? Where's the wood? Where's it come from? What glue? What resin? All the variables that make up to it. So there's two standards for that. You've got EPD standard, but you've also got ISO 14067. I would recommend looking into that and reading that one if you're familiar with ISO. But what I would say is please engage and reach out to us with that. That's a very specific question, but myself and Ryan, who's one of our directors, will be able to help with that.
Can I just add there that I think it's a really good question, because there are no figures for a lot of the equipment that we buy in the survey profession. And, that's something which, I'd like to add to my carbon reporting, is the actual cost of a GPS or GNSS or a total station, whereas, they're very high value items, which are probably being overstated in terms of its carbon footprint. Because they're high value, they're only like this big, and yet they've got the same carbon footprint as a car. So it'd be nice for the manufacturers to look into that and get those numbers.
I think you touched on a key bit really, is this question's great because it's a whole bucket of conversation, but fundamentally that the natural progression with this space as we move towards our national net zero targets is what's the emissions of the organizations, and in time, what are the emissions of products, because they do feed in. So like for Mike, when he's buying this surveying equipment, that is inherently quite expensive. But the reality of it is that the spend value is not proportionate to necessarily the emissions associated with it. So that's why product emissions are better. We do have another question. What resources are available to support my SME? I can't quite read the other words, at EcoVadis applications. So EcoVadis is really interesting. So basically, having a carbon footprint and having it verified for EcoVadis is really beneficial. It really helps with the application process. And often a lot of our clients who do approach us are part of that group of people who are working towards EcoVadis. So it's definitely worth doing. EcoVadis is every 2 years, but the clients we work with do it every year with us because the benefit of it is definitely there. And for SMEs as well, I think some of the myths of this process is that it's too expensive or it's too complex for an SME. I mentioned risk at the start of it. The cost of this process is associated with risk and size. So SMEs, generally speaking, are lower risk, not to underplay what you do, but they're lower risk and less complex. So that means the time allocated for that, which is what we use as an indicator of cost, is proportionate, which means that it would be lower. Whereas if you are a big group with 20 sites over 20 countries, and you've got 3 languages I've got to deal with, obviously the time for that is more and the cost will be more, but it's still, as far as we're aware, it's very palatable and very comparable as well, which is, obviously I'm going to say that, but that is the case for it. Any other questions we have? Perfect. So we can start wrapping up now. And any questions that come through, we will follow up through email. So please, by all means, I can reach out to you via email, or if you want to send us some contact info, we can contact you. By all means, follow me on LinkedIn, and I can start sharing some useful information and insights into this space. But a big thank you to Mike and Storm, who've made the effort to come here today and really helped provide some insight. And thank you for the team who created all this. So Amy, Polly, and Beth, who are the sort of the wizards behind all of this. So thank you all for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Don't forget to drink tap water.
Yeah, absolutely. All the best. Bye.
Cheers.